And welcome to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm Sean Meyers, and I'll be joined by a very special guest as we welcome a professional wrestler as well as a referee, Bobby Williams. That's to come on this special edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. And welcome back to another edition. I am your host, Sean Meyers, wearing my best attempt at a Christmas green sweater here in the holiday spirit, just a couple days before Christmas. And we have a special episode on tap as I welcome in Bobby Williams. And Bobby, thank you for taking the time. I want to thank Matt Vandriak for help setting this up. He's been great connecting me with local wrestlers, and in this case, a local wrestler slash referee. And the first thing that I ask everyone that I have on this show is tell me how you first became a fan of professional wrestling.
Well, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk. My story is the same as almost everybody's. I grew up watching wrestling as a kid. I don't remember a time when wrestling wasn't on TV. My family, going back to my grandfather, who was a big-time wrestling fan, passed that down to my father, my mother, and so there's never been a time when I haven't watched wrestling. One of my earliest memories and one of my favorite memories is the Bret Hart versus British Bulldog SummerSlam '92 Wembley Stadium match. I remember that match vividly. It's one of my favorites.
Did you watch it live, or did you have to go and rent it at Blockbuster a couple weeks later?
Yep, I watched it live. Yep, we always got the pay-per-views at the house. You know, the whole family would come over. We'd have a big Sunday dinner, and everybody would sit by my grandparents' television and watch the pay-per-views.
So I think you're in about the same time frame as I am, because I remember back to about 1990 ballpark watching wrestling. And it continued, and I was always a fan of wrestling. There was never really a period where I stopped watching it. So you mentioned 1992. I'm guessing we fast forward another 10 plus years, and all of a sudden you want to become involved in professional wrestling as well.
You know, going back to even the 90s when I was a kid, anybody in my family can tell you that that's all I did was wrestle around with my cousins, wrestle around with my toys. And I mean, I would jump off the couch, dropping elbows in the living room. So I always knew that it was something that I wanted to do, but it was just a matter of like, how do you do it? So as I got older, I discovered local wrestling in Pittsburgh. So I was hooked. I was in my lunchroom in middle school, and there was a poster hanging on the wall that said "Live Pro Wrestling Friday Night at Steel Valley High School." So I ripped that poster down, took it home to my brother, and I said, "Look, there's live wrestling here at the school on Friday. I mean, we need to go." And so that was my introduction to professional wrestling locally. So that I got close enough to see it up close, and eventually, that became an obsession, and it was one of those things where I needed more. So I kept following, went to every show I could, and started getting close to some of the boys.
Now, whether it be WWE or any major promotion, they always tell the backstories of some of these superstars who began when they were teenagers, and in some cases 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And technically, especially here in North America and in Pennsylvania in particular, I think legally you're supposed to be 18 years old before you wrestle. But we've heard so many stories that there's usually ways around it. So you were not quite 18. You're off by, I think, a couple of years, actually. But you decided, I want to be involved. So kind of take me through how you were able to do that, I guess, without getting caught.
Yeah, so in 1998, I knew a local professional wrestler by the name of T. Ranchula.
Who's still wrestling to this day.
Yes, he is. Absolutely. T has been a family friend for many years, going back to when he was a kid. He dated one of my cousins. So my family knew him very well, and T was beginning to run his own wrestling company in Munhall called Far North Wrestling, FNW, and his first event was being held at the Community Days Fair here in town. So my father ran into T, who owned his own pizza shop, and was like, "Hey, my boy wants to get involved in wrestling. Can he come down and maybe set up the ring and set up some chairs?" So here I'm 12 years old, hanging out with T Ranchula, setting up my first professional wrestling ring. So, here I am, 12 years old, starting off like paying my dues, and then, fast forward doing that on every show I possibly can get my hands on. I got introduced to a gentleman who was also a Munhall resident, and Steel Valley graduate named James Fawcett, who wrestled locally under the name of Devil Budokan. And I began doing his website when I was 14 years old. It was a school project that I had where I had to manage a website, build, manage, and create from start to finish for the entire school year. So that was my project. And Devil let me follow him around, and the rest was kind of history when it came to like getting involved. One day in particular, he said, "Hey, you know what? I never paid you to do this website. Is there something that I can do to repay you?" And I said, "No, I just want to be involved. I just want to get involved in the ring somehow." And he said, "You know what?" He's like, I teach wrestling at this school in Penn Hills. Would you want to come out and check it out?" So, 15 at the time. My parents weren't too open to the idea because, again, I'm 15 years old. I got college years ahead of me.
Now, had you ever injured yourself with the wrestling, with the stuffed animals, or with the family members or anything prior to that? Did they have any concern about you doing anything like that?
Yeah, like I was a kid, so backyard wrestling was a thing. So I like have my friends over and we'd wrestle around in the backyard. And no, I never did get too banged up or anything like that. I kind of played it safe,
right?
Because I knew a little bit more about wrestling, that it was more show than it was, going out there and power bombing my friend on his head. I knew that there was an art form behind it. So it was one of those things where I think they like saw like my interest, and like they would lean me into like, let's look at this in the big picture. And there's a story that I wrote in my memoir that my dad used to travel all over the world. He worked in the steel industry, and he was working on a job site in Detroit. And on his way home, he had a layover in the airport. I can't remember which town he was in. And this was right after we had our first conversation about me actually like pursuing professional wrestling, again, at 15 years old. So my dad's walking through the airport, and he sees this guy sitting eating a sandwich, and happened to get a closer look at him, and was like, "Wait a second, that's a wrestler." He's like, and he gets closer, and he's like, "That's Al Snow." So he introduces himself to Al, and Al was nice enough to talk to him. And he's like, "Hey, I need to ask your advice on something. My son, he wants to get involved in wrestling. What do you think I should do? I mean, he's 15, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "You know what? If he wants to go anywhere in this business, why don't you start him out young? Research your school, find a good reputable trainer, and, baby steps, see what happens." So
which is ironic because Al Snow became a trainer, right? I mean, he was on Tough Enough as a trainer when that show started.
Right. Yep, absolutely. I mean, he was in WWE at the time. This was in, early 2001. So, yeah, my dad came home that day and pulled me aside and was like, "Look, I ran into Al Snow. He actually, signed a little book for me and told me the story, and the rest is history." I started my training 2 weeks later.
So you mentioned the memoirs, and I want to talk about that. You're also just a couple days ago featured in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, nice feature article on you. Those are both very exciting things, but it came about 20 years after you started in professional wrestling, so you certainly paid your dues, as you mentioned before. Did you ever think when you were maybe a 15-year-old that you would be more recognized as a referee than as a wrestler, and how did that sort of come about that you were donning the stripes?
So when I first started training, Devil was my trainer. He came to my house and spoke to my parents about how he wanted me to start out small. He didn't want me to go out there and just start wrestling, because it is a physical sport. It takes a lot of toll on your body. So he wanted to make sure that he protected me. And so I started training as just a referee. And the first time that I went out and refereed even a practice match, I fell in love with it, because there is an importance to a referee, not just being there to count to three, or to count to 10. There's a lot more to that, and there's a bit of a secret behind it, and I think I perfected it over the years. Being the guy that kind of helps lead the match. You're the one communicating more than you're just standing there, counting. So I've learned a lot about how to be a good ref and to help the guys in the ring.
I kind of want to touch on that, because as I said, watched WWF, WWE for almost 30 years, and you always hear the officials in their role there, making sure that the wrestlers are safe. But you also know that they have the little earpiece in, and they're getting cues on how much time's left, when they're going to commercials, things like that. At lower levels, independent wrestling, when you're working here in the Pittsburgh area, and of course you're very well known with the International Wrestling Cartel, which is a pretty darn good independent wrestling promotion, as well as some other promotions that you've worked with, including WrestleRex, which we've highlighted on the show.
Sure.
What is that responsibility? Is there communication with the back while the match is going on? Do you have time constraints, things like that? What are some of the key aspects that you alluded to?
Well, there are the earpieces where there are times where I have been in the ring with the earpiece, and you're talking to the team in the back that give you the time cues, and that is important, because especially if you have a marathon show, where some of these independents, they can run 3-4 hours, and that's a little long for an audience to sit and be invested in it. So you want to make sure that matches stay within the time. And then sometimes there's injuries. You got to communicate to the people in the back that so and so got hurt. I've had to recently. I had to stop a match because of an injury. A guy was concussed, and it was extremely obvious when I was checking on him that he was not able to compete, and I had to stop the match. It was the first time in 19 years that I actually had to do that, and that was like I said, just recently. So there are some important things that you have to do and worry about. Mostly the time is being the big issue.
So you mentioned you really like your role as an official, because you sort of orchestrate things that maybe go somewhat unnoticed. Do you have a match or a show where it stands out to you much like it would a wrestler? Like, hey, I was really in the groove. This was my best work. This is sort of the standard that I want to try to live up to.
There was a match in particular. It was the very last IWC Norm Connors era.
I remember Norm.
Yep, he ran,
and he sold it to Chuck Roberts. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. So Norm ran in Franklin, what he called the Night of Legends, and one match in particular that I refereed was the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express, and
those guys have worked together many times over the years, I'm guessing, correct?
Absolutely. And you have Jim Cornette, ringside with the Midnights, and the entire match was called from Jim Cornette relaying everything to me in the ring. So I had to communicate with all four guys in the ring everything that Corny was saying down on the floor.
Why did it work out like that? Why was Cornette the one relaying it to you?
I'll peel back the curtain a little bit for you here, but that's how Cornette works. He called the entire match from the floor. Do this spot, do this spot, do this, do that. And I mean, the whole match, he kept yelling at me, and I had to relay everything to the guys in the ring.
Is there a match where you got really caught up in just it being tremendous between the competitors, and you sort of became a fan of the match while still having to do your job?
Oh, absolutely. That happens more often than not anymore. Earlier on in my career, I was fortunate enough to travel abroad, and I was booked in England. And this was like one of the biggest moments of my career. I'm in the ring, and Jeff Jarrett comes out to cut a promo. The storyline that was built online leading up to this show was it was Jeff Jarrett versus Bret Hart. Obviously, Bret Hart not able to compete, so Bret would have a mystery opponent for Jeff Jarrett. So Jarrett comes out, interrupts the show while ring announcer's getting ready to call on the next match, demands that his match get moved forward. He's tired of waiting for Bret. Cue Bret Hart's music. Bret comes out, he cuts his interview, and he introduces his mystery opponent for Jeff Jarrett. The mystery opponent ended up being the son of the British Bulldog. So Harry Smith comes out, and he and Jarrett end up working. Now we'll rewind to my very favorite wrestling match: Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog in Wembley Stadium. Here I am in Doncaster, England, standing in the ring with Bret Hart's music playing and the British Bulldog's music playing. I was completely caught up in the moment there. I get chills even to this day just thinking about that.
That's awesome. Everything go according to plan in that match?
Absolutely. It was a fantastic match. Got involved a little bit. I think I got pushed by Jarrett and some cheap win he got for that match, and afterward Bret Hart bought me a beer.
You mentioned getting pushed, and I want to get into how you're probably better suited than maybe some refs to handle the physicality, but also staying on this same theme of you really enjoyed that moment, you got caught up in it a little bit. Is there a particular wrestler, I don't want to go on the negative route and say that's hard to work with, is there someone that's your favorite person to work with as an official?
There were so many that I really enjoyed working with. The late JT Lightning, he and I would play off of each other. We had our routine spots that we would do. My former trainer, Devil Budokan, because his was a little different, he would do things in the ring to try to make me laugh, to just because he was an entertaining guy.
I was going to ask, is there a time where guys are just saying stuff that only you can hear and appreciate, and you have to try not to start cracking up?
Especially when guys wear masks. And my trainer, Devil, he obviously wore a mask. I have his shirt hanging behind me and his old training mask. But yeah, he would say a lot of the things like that were off the wall. We'll go back to, like, I wrestled him a couple of times when I was wrestling for a company that he had booked for. So it was my first match against him. We lock up, and he puts me in a headlock. And again, peel back the curtain a little bit. He's telling me the spot that we're going to do. He's like, all right, we're going to shoot me off, shoulder tackle, drop down, step over, hip toss, arm drag, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to bang your mom. Now go. And I'm here laughing, like yelling at him because he's, he's making jokes about my mom while we're running our spot.
I always think it's incredible. And I've heard, different guys like basically telling jokes, telling stories during the match and how they're able to do that. I guess it comes with time. It sort of comes, second nature to them, but that's always entertaining. Now, we mentioned you're also a wrestler. So while people who go to IWC, and I've gone to probably almost a dozen IWC shows dating back to, see if you remember this, the first Super Indie show, which I think was like 2002 in Monroeville.
Yeah, 2002. I set up the ring, and I set up all the chairs for that event.
And it was Super Hentai, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Won that. It also featured CM Punk and Colt Cabana and Chris Hero and Christopher Daniels and Loki, so on and so forth. But a lot of people know you as an official. So tell me about how you also are a professional wrestler and how you sort of wear both hats. And the difference is, obviously, it's pretty apparent what the main difference between being a ref and being a competitor is, but maybe some of the other aspects that people might not consider.
Sure. So you mentioned the very first Super Indie. One of the competitors in Super Indie wrestled under the name of Kid Sensation. He wrestled Loki in the first round. I was friends with Kid Sensation, CJ Sensation now known as. When he broke in, he wrestled under a mask, and he was called the Mantis. And when I was just going to local shows, I fell in love with the gimmick and the character. That when I became friends with CJ, I jokingly mentioned to him one day that I wanted to take over the role of Mantis, knowing that he was taking the mask off and he was going to wrestle as his true self. I said, you know what? I love that gimmick. I want to do it one day, and he ended up selling it to me. So when I started physically wrestling training, I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a full like sprint into becoming a professional wrestler and wearing the mask and treating it with the most respect that I can. I wanted to create Mantis as like the American version of Tiger Mask. I was the second born Mantis, and I would just take it and just run with it. So I started in, I think it was around 2005. I'm sorry. I had one match in 2002 as Mantis, and it was a complete disaster. And then I didn't know about this until just a few years ago. My opponent in that very first match as Mantis, he went on to become a guy that's pretty familiar right now in WWE as Luke Gallows.
Okay, nice.
So he wrestled in his.
You would think
second
you would
match.
remember wrestling like a 285-pound guy that's probably about 6'6".
Yeah, he was. It's actually kind of funny because I was inadvertently on Jericho's podcast in a conversation that Jericho and Gallows were having on a segment that they had called Talking Shop. And they were talking to Gallows about when he broke in some of the crappy gimmicks that he had wrestled against. And the Mantis came up, and he like kind of buried me on there, but it was, playful Barry. And I sit back and I think about it. And I'm like, you know what? I have this match on tape. He may be making fun of me, but we should be making fun of him because he couldn't work at all. And I have a couple people that can attest to it that like, instead of throwing like, the Ric Flair knife edge chop, he was throwing back fists at people. And like, I got hit with a couple of those and they were brutal.
Have you come across him anytime over the past decade or so?
I haven't ran into him. I've talked to him a couple of times in passing, and the last conversation that I had was right after Jericho randomly showed up at an IWC event, and I caught wind that he was going to be there, so I made sure that I packed a Mantis mask with me because I wanted to put over the appearance on his podcast. And it's a really funny story. When I found out that Jericho pulled up to the building, I had one of the trainees stationed out. We have a garage door in the locker room. And I said, hey, there's going to be a knock at the door. Whenever you hear it, please let somebody in. And he was like, well, who is it? I was like, it's going to be Chris Jericho. The guy's like, no, seriously, who's going to be there? I was like, Chris Jericho. And I had to walk away because I had to go out and referee a match. And sure enough, Jericho walks in and this kid's jaw hits the floor. So post-match, I go up to him and I, introduced myself and I said, hey, I wanted to put something over to you that I was inadvertently on your podcast. And he was like, what shitty gimmick were you? So, yeah, that was my claim to fame when I first started. That I wrestled Luke Gallows. And, later on, I kind of did both on the same show. And it was kind of hard to do. Not too many people picked up on it, in my opinion, because I didn't get too many of the, hey, wait a second, you were just out.
But you were still wearing the mask at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would wrestle under the mask as Mantis, and I would referee as myself. There was a couple of shows in particular where I literally just get out of the ring from wrestling my match, hurry up and throw on my referee gear and go out and referee the next match to try to like make it look like maybe it wasn't me after all, because there's no way that you can get dressed like that in seconds.
Right. Did you ever have like a reveal when you were reffing and started doing some of the same moves, or how did?
Yeah. So what happened was people started catching on after a while, I think. And I was getting kind of tired of refereeing. So what we ended up running this little storyline in this company that I was wrestling for in McKeesport called PWX. I became a heel official. The big company, is IWC in Pittsburgh. So we made up like that I was the senior official of IWC. So I made like this little, like, I don't know, like a badge with my picture on it to make it look more official. And I turned heel in a match because I was creating a super group of heels that had competed in IWC at one point. And it was an anniversary show, which is like PWX's WrestleMania.
Right.
There was a heavyweight title match. The champion was Sterling James Keenan, now known as Corey Graves.
Yes.
He wrestled local Pittsburgh icon Chris Taylor and I believe Scotty Gash in a triple threat match. And I did the old-fashioned 1-2 stop, flip them off, and I revealed that I'm a bad guy. So over the next couple of shows, I would also be part of this group as Mantis. And it kind of got kind of funky because, you would see me with a mask on, and then you would see me without a mask on. And then finally, I took the mask off to reveal that it was me the whole time. And, my group consisted of, I believe Scotty Gash joined, Shirley Doe made the jump to PWX, and we kind of ran with it for a little while and had our little group going.
Shirley Doe, also a trainer for IWC, I believe.
At one point, yeah.
He actually trained Elias,
and he was also responsible for Shima Zion.
Yes, DJZ, or I can't even remember his name now.
Joquan Wild,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Now.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Everyone just knows him as DJZ, basically.
He's always going to be Shima to me.
So, interesting that I get you on tonight because this comes just a couple days. Was it Sunday's paper, or when were you in the Post-Gazette?
It was this past Sunday. I had a nice little feature article in the business section for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a column about from a guy named Tony Norman, who wrote this column about sweat equity and like just odd jobs within Pittsburgh. And well, I guess I'd be considered having an odd job.
So in that, and I was able to read it online, and I would recommend people check it out. They can go to postgazette.com or probably still pick up the paper somewhere. It kind of talked about how you were starting when you were a teenager and your different, I guess, aspects to this journey to where you are now, how it's not a full-time job. Obviously, you can't make a living just doing this, but it's still something that you seemingly always want to do. So did you get a lot of responses? I know it's only about less than 48 hours from when it actually came out, but what did you hear in terms of when that came out?
It's crazy. Like I'm always one that kind of just like sits back and just I don't promote myself like I probably should. I
can promote you though. I have your Twitter handle here. It is RPW Wrestling 138.
Yep.
People could check that out, and also. I know you gave me some other stuff. You're on Instagram, but you're involved with a number of different promotions as well. So before you get into this story, go ahead and promote yourself. You have free reign right now.
Yeah. You just mentioned my Instagram, my Twitter. You can see me at any of the local professional wrestling organizations, IWC in Elizabeth, Rise in Dunbar, the Rex down at Wrestle Rex at the Rex Theater in Southside. Those are pretty much the three companies that I work for on a regular basis. And then whatever else pops up, sometimes I get these random phone calls that, they want me here, they want me there, and I'll pretty much go wherever.
And Wrestle Rex, I believe February is the next show?
Yeah, February 27th, Thursday night. Yep.
IWC typically runs at least one a month?
Yep, one a month. Our next one there is January 18th.
And that's at the Court Time Sports Center?
Court Time Sports Center in Elizabeth. That's going to be one of my favorite shows that IWC runs because it's called the Reset Button. There's always a bunch of surprises and matches are made at random. So it's always an exciting event. You just never know who's going to pop their head in.
So again, you got a pretty nice response from this article when it was published.
I did, and it's surprising because, like I said, I don't put myself out there anymore. I'm nearing the end of my wrestling career. 19 years, that's a long time. It's time for this new generation to step up and take over, and most of these guys, they are. But my phone has been blowing up. I mean, the respect from the wrestling community is overwhelming. Everybody's had nothing but nice things to say about me, nothing but nice things to say about the article. I mean, I think he did a fantastic job, and I actually got a message from him this morning, thanking me for it and saying, you know what, I could talk to you for hours. He's like, you have so many stories and so much to talk about. He's like, the Post Gazette, they actually cut out a lot of the story, and he's going to send me the full version. So I'm working on another book project, and I think I'm going to put it all in that one.
Well, you mentioned that maybe your time coming to an end in wrestling. Now, is that as an active competitor? Is that as an official? What exactly? Give me the outlook for your future.
You know what? It's always hard. Never say never in wrestling. I mean, you see it more often than not. You know, the Terry Funk retirement.
Right.
So
probably 25 years ago he retired, and he's still wrestling at some point.
Exactly. I mean, hey, Flair got cleared for action, so you know, it's hard to say. I mean, I know physically I can't go out and wrestle 5 times in a week. My body will not be able to handle that. So I think my in-ring days are going to be limited soon. But as far as refereeing, I mean, it's my passion. I think I've worked hard at it, and I don't want to give that up.
So you mentioned that you'll be having maybe a second book coming out. Well, let's touch on the one that did come out. And I told you before we went on, you sent me a link. I wasn't able to see it, which is unfortunate. But I know it's a memoir of a lot of your photos, along with little side stories relating to them over the year.
Here's a copy of it.
Okay.
I got this is the teaser that my first edition, and I did it all by myself. I self-published it, designed it, and because I was rushing through trying to get it completed, I didn't take into consideration that, you know what, you maybe need to slow down a little bit and focus on some margins and spacing things out appropriately. So I ended up scrapping this one and redid it, and the finished product is what's online now. I'll send you another link to it because the first one, the file got corrupted somehow, and the first prints.
So if people are interested in checking this out, what's the best way for them to do so?
I published it through Blurb. I put links on my Twitter. I put links on my Instagram. So if you want to tag me on that, I'll be sure to keep sharing that, because trust me, I'm going to try to get this out to as many people as wants to see something interesting. But what I did was I kept a log of every match that I ever refereed and every match that I've ever been involved in. And this first memoir that I put out was about just my referee career. I've wrote some stories, and I've collected all the photos that I could find, and I just put it all together in one little book.
And that was you and Jericho on the cover, right?
Yeah, that was from his appearance at IWC.
Now I do have one complaint. When I looked online, the Post Gazette, I believe, identified him as Rhino. Did you notice that?
I did not notice that.
When I looked online, I swear it said referee Bobby Williams next to superstar Rhino, and it was that same picture.
There was another picture that I used. It's right here.
Okay, there's Rhino.
Yeah, it's myself and Rhino from an IWC event inside of a steel cage.
Was he champion for a while?
He was for a short period of time, yeah.
So without giving it away, you mentioned Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith's son as a key moment in your career. But what else in that memoir really stands out if you were to pick out just one or two things?
What's kind of cool is if you go back and you can just look at some of the matches, you were in the ring with this guy, and I've been in the ring with so many different people, whether it's their first match, their last match, or just they randomly showed up at a local event. It's kind of cool to go back and, on paper, in my notebook, I have everything numbered, but I took out the numbers in here because it got too confusing. There was just too many numbers, and it was really messing with my eyes. But going back, I would go and say, what match was number 1,255, and I could just go to the book and look, and there it is.
How many matches ballpark have you been a part of?
About 2,000.
Okay, and that's over about nearly 20 years at this point.
Yep. 19. It'll be 19 years in May.
Is there? I'm sure you've gotten to the point now where you can recognize talent even in its fledgling stages of wrestlers' careers. Is there a guy that you saw very early on, whether it be his first match or maybe a handful of matches into his career, and said that guy's going to be a star, and then it came to fruition?
Yep. His name is Elias. I knew he wrestled locally as Logan Chulo in IWC, and when I first started with IWC, he was just a student. And, there was a large group of us that would set up the ring and set up the chairs and everything. And Logan, he would always wear like these oversized like sweaters. And like you really couldn't tell other than he looked like a homeless guy.
He would go to the gym wearing like XX t-shirts, whereas most people wear the least amount of clothing they can if they're put together.
So when he was booked for his first match, which was against CJ Sensation, the original Mantis, he was gearing up in the locker room and he took off his shirt, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Where did this guy come from? And he went out there and he stole the show. I mean, he had the size, he had the look, he looked like $1 million. And it took time for him to find his way as far as a character and his style in ring, but I knew from the first time I seen him in full gear, I said, this kid's gonna be something special.
Did you ever think that he would become the personality that he now is in WWE?
Originally, no. I didn't think that would be the gimmick for him, but later on, when he kind of started doing that in IWC.
This was like the heel portion after the Heavy Metal Jesus?
Yeah. When he became Heavy Metal Jesus, then I really what, that makes sense. It makes sense as to how he took that to the WWE.
Bobby, this has really been great. I enjoy hearing stories, especially involving Elias. Anything else that you wanted to convey? I know you have a lot of stuff that you probably could promote better than you do, so I want to give you that opportunity again. But anything else that you want to get out there? Because I think you have a great really appreciation of the business and a great background to discuss with both wrestling and officiating. I'm not sure there's that many guys out there that are similar to you.
Sure. Well, a lot of guys like locally, I know a lot of people that started out refereeing and then went on to be a wrestler, and Corey Graves is a good example. He used to referee IWC shows when he was 17, 18 years old before he started wrestling matches. So, I just like to say that I respect this business so much that I was willing to do whatever I could to even just dip my toe in the water. So, wrestling has taught me so much about me as a person that I will never forget anything that I've done. That's why I wanted to make a memoir and keep track of everything that I have done, so that one day I can show my daughter, say, hey, look, this is what your dad used to do. This was his passion. And if you want to do something, you just need to focus your energy on doing it and we'll make it happen.
Great stuff. As always, I always enjoy having special guests on, and we've had some good ones over the years. Harley T. Morris, who you said as well. We've also had Bob Orquist, the owner of IWC. We had the owner of KSWA. Don't want Norm Connors or Justin Plummer coming after me. But we've also had some great wrestlers on. We recently had a couple from the KSWA, Sean Blanchard and Lou Martin. But you are the first official that we had on the show. We've had a ring announcer as well, and Matt Vandriek. So we got the official now covered. Pretty much all bases for professional wrestling we've had on the podcast now.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about me.
All right. That is Bobby Williams, professional wrestler and professional wrestling referee as well. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's here, 5-Star Pod Wrestle, on Instagram, 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on notifications so you find out about each and every episode. I will be back next week to have our year-end awards with the returning Justin Lowry. But in the meantime, we'll catch you again next week, and have a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. We'll see you back here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.